Is being an Uber driver and Lyft driver affecting your health? Long story short, yes. This is something I've wanted to talk about for a little bit. I've mentioned it a couple times in other videos, but I really want to do a complete dedicated video towards this because I've even got a lot of comments of people saying, hey, Mark, I've been driving for years. I've done thousands of rides, and I've noticed it has taken a toll on my health. Now, here is the tricky thing. One, I think we've all heard this has gotten more popular, that sitting for long periods of time has been shown to be very, very bad for your health. This is true not just for Uber and Lyft drivers, but if you work in an office, if you're a truck driver, if, you're a video editor, if you're a graphic designer, right? I feel like especially in this day and age, a lot of people work from home and everything. And sitting for a long period of time, like unfortunately I'm doing now, I'm sitting filming this video, and definitely not the best for you. However, I actually think it's worse for Uber and Lyft drivers for a reason I'll talk about in a second. Now, before I get into that, talking about the health and the science, and I might as well stress, I'm not a doctor. I never pretend to be one in any of my videos, but I am big into health and fitness. And I'm reading some studies that stated that yes, for a lot of people, what do? They say, okay, well, I'm gonna work in an office cubicle or drive, right? When I get home, I'm gonna work out, right? Because I'm gonna work out to make sure it kind of mitigates or kind of counteracts me sitting all day. But they have found in studies that even let's say you do work out, after let's say you sit for 6 to 8 hours, it does not counteract or mitigate the health effects of sitting that long, which is kind of scary because let's say you drive for 6 to 8 hours. For a lot of Uber and Lyft drivers, that's like say a typical shift. You get home, you're like, all right, now I'm gonna work out. That's actually not gonna mitigate or diminish the negative health effects of driving that long. And the reason why I think this is worse for Uber and Lyft drivers, I might as well include like taxi drivers as well, truck drivers, basically anyone driving, is in an office. I remember when I used to be an accountant, it was very typical that every 20 or 30 minutes, I'd stand up, kind of do one of these, maybe stretch a little bit. Maybe I go get a coffee, get more water, come sit back down, right? In an office, it's very easy to do that. Or like say you're working from home, very easy to do that. But as you can imagine with the logistics of getting out of your vehicle, especially when driving, it gets very tricky. However, studies have shown that when it comes to mitigating or almost removing all the negative effects of sitting, they found that let's say if you get up, maybe go for a walk, a stretch, or do something like some kind of light, I stress the word, super light activity, it does help almost remove all that negative thing. It's almost like by sitting for too long, it seems to be the biggest issue. So a big thing I suggest to a lot of drivers, because you may be wondering like, shoot, I didn't even think about that. Like, what do I do? This is something I did. And that is any single time, this is kind of my rule to myself. I found it wasn't as weird as you think, is let's say I pulled up to someone's place. And here's my 2 rules. One, it had to be in a residential area. If let's say you're in a city, it's too dangerous if you're on a main road, not worth the risk whatsoever. The second thing is the person had to say, hey, I'll be outside in 5 minutes. Now, I promise you, not once did I ever have someone say anything weird. And what I do is, like say, pull up to a residential area, let's say someone's house, let's say it's a Friday night, they're getting ready to go out. Let's say pull up, very typical on a Friday night, they're like, hey, I'm sorry, we're finishing up our drinks, we're still getting ready, we'll be out in a couple minutes. What I do is I turn off the car, or leave it on if you want, I guess depending on like maybe the heat, or if it's cool out, whatever, you want to have it be a good temperature. I'd get out of the car, just kind of stand right next to my door, even have the door open, just kind of stretch a little bit, do one of these moves. Once I'd see them coming out, I'd be like, hey, what's up? And then I'd get in the car. Now, I did have people say to me sometimes, like, oh, like, were you standing there or something like that? But usually not. Usually I think if you see, someone going like this, it's kind of like an unspoken thing, like, oh, they've been driving, they're just standing to kind of stretch their legs. And this is a good way when it comes to the kind of health aspects of being a driver to heavily mitigate that, right? A big thing I do have to suggest though, I don't suggest doing this when you drop somebody off. I think it's weird if, let's say you drop somebody off, even if it's at their house or a residential area, if you drop somebody off, they get out and then you get out, seems kind of creepy, right? So I will say that. So that's why I suggest doing it when you pull up, or like if you want, if let's say you want to have it on a timer, next you drop somebody off, drive a little bit away so they can't see you, then get out of your car and stretch. I think that's another reasonable approach. But I think it was just easier for me personally to kind of make it a rule that, okay, if I drive up to somebody's house and it's a house or it's in like a neighborhood where I can easily get out, not being worried about like being hit by a car or anything, and they tell me that they're going to be out in a couple minutes, I had to step out of the car, and stretch a bit. I know it might be annoying because you might be like, oh, I'd rather just sit and just wait for them. But I promise you, it does definitely add up. And I noticed that the days where I'd be driving and wouldn't get out of the car at all versus the days where I would do this, I definitely would feel better afterwards. And I've said this before in other videos too. Maybe this is included with it, I'm not sure, but there's something odd I can't explain about driving for 6 to 8 hours. Because if you think about it, you're just sitting, right? But there's something about driving that long that you definitely feel it, and it's almost exhausting. Like, I've driven coast to coast 9 times here in America. When I've done distance drives for, let's say, 8 or 9 or 10 hours, I think the most I've ever driven without stopping, in a sense, is 16 hours, which definitely would never do again because sleep exhaustion is a real thing when driving. But I typically do about like 8 to 10 hours when distance driving, when doing road trips. I mean, after that, I feel brutally exhausted. Even though you're just sitting, just doing this, right? There's something about that super exhausting. And so this is a good way to mitigate that because, like I said, for a lot of the drivers out there, I know this is something you probably don't think about because you're like, oh, I'm just going to be driving. I'm trying to make money. I'm going to do a 6 to 8 hour shift on a Friday night and a Saturday night. But I promise you that kind of health, situation does really start to add up. And I know a lot of people who've developed even some health complications, like say for truck drivers who drive so crazy hours and, nonstop and everything, they do eventually start to sometimes develop some health complications. And like I said, which is kind of scary when it comes to this, even if you do work out after you drive and you're like, I'm going to work out because I just was sitting for 8 hours, it doesn't mitigate all that effects. So I suggest, if you can, I know sometimes it may seem annoying or even whatever, just get out of your car. Like I said, when you're in a good residential area and when someone says, oh, I'll be there in a second, I'm just going to wait, get out of your car, do some stretching. I promise you, doing it now, even if you don't have any health complications yet, or if you're like, say you're like, oh, well, I'm fine. I promise you, doing it, you'll be so much happier years down the road.